हेलो एवरीवन, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मेरा नाम हया फातिमा इकबाल है और मैं हाजिर हूँ फुल ब्राइट वुमेन पॉडकास्ट की एक एपिसोड के साथ जिसमें मेरी गेस्ट हैं सारा मुनीर। सारा इज मास्टर्स इन जर्नलिज्म फ्रॉम कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी। शी डिड हर मास्टर्स ऑन द फुल ब्राइट स्कॉलरशिप, and Sarah is a journalist and a communication design expert, and she's also doing a lot of interesting things today outside of journalism and communication design. I'm so very excited to meet you, Sarah. क्या हाल है आपके?
हेलो हया, थैंक यू फॉर दैट इंट्रोडक्शन। आई एम गुड। आप कैसे हैं?
मैं बिल्कुल खैरियत से हूँ। सारा, पहले तो आप ये बताएं कि भाई आपने कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी से पढ़ा है और पाकिस्तानीज को एक बहुत ऑब्सेशन है, अक्सर अक्सर पाकिस्तानियों को आईवी लीग यूनिवर्सिटी में एडमिशन हासिल करने का। आप हमें जरा बताएं कि क्या प्रोज एंड कॉन्स हैं एक आईवी लीग यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ने के।
जब आप पाकिस्तानियों की बात कर रहे हैं तो आई थिंक आई वाज वन ऑफ दोज पाकिस्तानीज हु हैड दिस कीड़ा ऑफ वांटिंग टू गो टू एन आईवी लीग, एंड आई थिंक a lot of it has to do with the images that we are fed while we are growing up. Like we have these certain ideals of what a good educational institution is, कि हम इस शहर में रहेंगे, स्कूल में जाएंगे, and for me Columbia was one of those institutions. And the experience I think was incredible, because जो हम समझते हैं एक Ivy League institution की prestige होती है, the kind of doors it opens for you, the kind of network you build over there, not just वहाँ पे faculty कैसी है, but आपकी जो student body भी होती है. Like in my batch, if I tell you, में हम लोग कोई 100-120 students थे, and we were from 70 different countries. तो एक batch में, meeting people from so many different backgrounds. One of them was actually like this North Korean journalist, so South Korean journalist, who had crossed into North Korea by mistake, and she was held hostage. She had written a book, so by the time she came to grad school, that was already her lived experience. So meeting people from those kinds of backgrounds, just by virtue of being around them, like I learned a lot. But at the same time, now in retrospect, when I look at my education, I do think there were a lot of flaws, and a lot of that was in terms of power structures, right? These institutions, in a lot of senses, are very outdated, not just in terms of their curriculum, but also like their approach towards the world, their world views. वो जाहिर है century पुराने उनके power structures हैं. They look at the world a certain way, and obviously that philosophy, directly or indirectly, is passed on to you, and it's not until like in my 30s when I critically examined यार कि इसमें से मेरे अपने views क्या हैं, and what are the views that have been passed on to me by these institutions that I've been at or worked at. You see a disconnect. और इसके लिए आपको काफी मतलब internally you have to do a lot of introspection, which doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. But I do think going to these traditional schools where a majority of the faculty is white. They're also far older, so their belief systems are very different from what we are as a generation. और हमारे बाद जो generations आएंगी वो तो खैर बहुत ही अलग है. तो जब आप स्कूल जाते हैं तो आप एक खुली किताब की तरह होते हैं, right? You absorb everything that is taught to you, and at times you're too young to have those critical thinking skills to be like, this doesn't make sense to me. Um, and at the same time, there are much smaller schools. There are liberal art colleges that have very, very good programs, which just don't have the same reputation or that brand name. I think essentially it's branding and marketing more than the value of what they're teaching. So for anyone who's considering going for a postgrad or an undergrad program, I think आपकी institution, उसकी institutional history, all of that is very important. The networks it will build for you, I mean, due credit to that. But I think there's a very core part that we miss, essentially, I think because of age, is going deeply into who the faculty is, what the program is. आप जिस program के लिए जा रहे हो, वो पढ़ा कौन रहे हैं, उनका अपना background क्या है? Do you agree with that? Is that a school of thought that you would want to pursue? Like my advice would be to not just go and chase like an Ivy League degree, because it also kind of becomes addictive, right? Like you want all these names and you keep checking them off without really questioning their value. So think about what you're pursuing, what is the best fit for that kind of program. And very, very important, like आपकी faculty कितनी diverse है, how diverse is the student body? Because going to college is not really just about getting a certain GPA or getting that degree, but it's also about the people that you meet, the people that you're interacting with, the real learning takes place outside of the classroom. और अगर वो classroom ही इतनी homogeneous है जो आपको कुछ सिखा नहीं सकती, कुछ नया दिखा नहीं सकती, then I think that education kind of remains incomplete.
एग्जैक्टली मतलब अगर आप न्यूयॉर्क टाइप की जगह पे जा रहे हैं तो मतलब कितना ही बड़ा लॉस हो सकता है अगर आपको डाइवर्स वॉइसेस ना सुनने को मिले क्लासरूम में या क्लासरूम के बाहर, क्योंकि उस शहर में सिर्फ एक तरह के लोग तो नहीं रहते, उस शहर में तो पूरी दुनिया आबाद है, राइट। और आई थिंक इसमें एक जो मुझे पर्सनली लगता है एज समवन हु नाउ टीचर्स एट अ यूनिवर्सिटी ऑल्सो, मुझे लगता है कि इसमें एक पेरेंटल प्रेशर भी थोड़ा सा होता है कि दिस ब्रांडिंग इज सो हैवी दैट आई थिंक इट्स लाइक sometimes like the elders around you want to throw your name at a party saying हमारी बच्ची तो फलानी यूनिवर्सिटी में गई है, right? Because
Yeah.
no one knows
Yeah.
the tiny liberal arts college जिसमें के अमेजिंग किस्म की फैकल्टी है और अमेजिंग किस्म का वो रिसर्च प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं और अमेजिंग काम कर रहे हो, लेकिन लोगों को होता है कि वो वहां पे क्या, और लोग, मुझे तो लगता है कि लोग सिटीज के बारे में भी बहुत बाइस्ड हैं कि मतलब न्यूयॉर्क, डीसी, शिकागो, एलए से ज्यादा तो मतलब यानी अगर आप कहें कि मैं किसी और स्टेट में हूँ तो वो होता है कि नहीं वहां पे क्यों, वहां पे क्या हो रहा है, सो इसलिए नहीं वहां पे भी पढ़ाई हो रही है। सो दिस इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, आई थिंक कमिंग फ्रॉम यू इट मैटर्स अ लॉट बिकॉज you've also later on worked in New York as well. And so it's almost like you know the lay of the land on the basis of which you're able to say these. मुझे आप ये भी बताएं सारा कि आप आप जर्नलिज्म स्कूल जब आप मास्टर्स करने गई थी, आप प्रैक्टिसिंग जर्नलिस्ट तो उससे पहले ही थी ना, पाकिस्तान में यू वर ऑलरेडी अ जर्नलिस्ट। I would love to know like what kind of organizations you were working with, and very importantly we really want to know what kind of stories were you covering, what what years were these, उस वक्त पाकिस्तान में क्या हो रहा था, what stories were you asked to chase or you chased on your own will, क्या चल रहा था जर्नलिस्टिक लाइफ में।
I have been in the newsroom from a very young age. Right after my undergrad, I went on to work at Dawn News, which at the time was the country's only English language news channel. And then I was there for a couple of years before leaving for my master's. And there were a few reasons why I decided to pursue my master's. But ये वो वक्त था जब, Pakistan में terrorism was at its peak. There was a lot of death, doom and destruction all around us. But मेरे career में एक चीज हमेशा से uniform रही है, that I've always gravitated towards inclusion and minorities. So women's issues, minority issues, youth issues, that has always been my beat, so to say. And even from that age, like I was just naturally inclined towards those stories. So there are two things that happened. When I was working there, there were a lot of, because इतना complicated वो time था, किसका version बता रहे हैं आप, who is right, who is wrong. उसके ऊपर से क्या, being an English language newsroom also had a lot of business model pressures. You were doing all of this great work, but your audience was not that big. So how do you do this how do you survive in this very moralistic industry while still making money? Like I got a front row seat to how difficult the business is. And at some point, why sensationalism just creeps into our news coverage, because that's just what works. Like in terms of a business model, आप उसको जितना भी resist कर लें, जब at the end of the day, when you can't pay salaries, when the threat is either you shut down or you cave in and do these stories that you don't necessarily agree with, you are bound to make the less risky choice because you have hundreds of people working for you. And the cost is कि आप, 50 अच्छी stories के against एक कोई sensationalist story, you're forced to do that. So that business side of journalism is something that I was very intrigued by. And then the ethics, those were two things that constantly kept confusing me. And I went to a lot of seniors, got different versions of, okay, how to navigate this. But there was this discomfort inside me because I was like, there has to be some academic framework through which these decisions become clearer. And you're not always questioning, yaar, ki, ye karna chahiye tha, ya ye karna chahiye tha. So at that point, I felt, okay, I need to study this if I want to do this long term, because I ended up in a newsroom by accident. I was actually an economics major, but somebody who just loved writing and listening. So जब मैंने 2-3 साल गुजार लिए and I was like, okay, I like this space. There's a lot of potential here. I want to be here, but I also want to understand it better to be able to do this better. So that's when I applied for the Fulbright, and that's how I went to Columbia. And then जब मैं एक दफा Columbia पहुंच गई, I was part of the generation where that big shift was happening towards digital. All these new tools were coming up, social media was becoming a thing. And that was the time when I shifted focus a little bit, and I was like, okay, all these old forms of journalism are now kind of taking a back seat. And I can either be part of the generation that's kind of, lamenting about the fact कोई हमारी stories नहीं पढ़ रहा, कोई journalism देखता नहीं है, or I can work with people who are actually thinking of this as an opportunity and trying to figure out how to work with these new mediums. So that's, I think, really when my career trajectory kind of changed.
And so you were talking about these ethical questions that were arising working in Pakistan, Pakistani newsrooms का अपना काम, फिर business का pressure. Um, जब आप चले गए ग्रेड स्कूल तो वो जो एथिकल क्वेश्चंस हैं वो उनके जवाब मिले या कंफ्यूजन और बढ़ गई?
So I think there are certain fields जिसके अंदर आपकी अपनी critical thinking skills are crucial, and they only come through lived experience. International relations हो गया, political science हो गई, journalism हो गया, because there is so much gray and there are so many agenda-based narratives that you have to kind of make sense of it on your own. So after having seen, the Pakistani landscape, the Pakistani news landscape, political landscape, and I really took a lot of baggage with me when I went there, because obviously Pakistan की एक geopolitical situation बहुत अलग थी, हमारी एक importance अलग थी, हमारे allies थे, कुछ हमारे enemies थे. So you really tend to internalize a lot of that as a journalist. And then I fast forward and I go to this completely different part of the world. और वहाँ पे उनके ethics थे और उनका point of view था, which was shaped very much from their lens, and it was in a lot of cases very black and white. But जो developed countries के models होते हैं वो हमारे developing economies में नहीं implement हो सकते. And as a young journalist, to absorb all of this and be like, okay, I came here to look for all of these answers, but instead what I found is maybe different ways of questioning things. And I think that's really what the learning was. You don't really get to any neatly tied answers. You just get different perspectives and you learn how to look at things in very different ways. So I think one thing that has really happened for me because of being privileged enough to have worked here and there is it has developed a very strong sense of empathy in me. Like I can look at the same situation from very different lenses, and I can empathize with people who come together from very different point of views. So I think, और दूसरी चीज है, I've learned how to listen without bias. Because एक हमारी protective instinct होती है, as soon as we hear something that doesn't agree with what we've grown up believing or what we've been taught in schools, like immediately आप defense mode में चले जाते हो. But what is really required to be a good journalist, and also like it's essential for productive communication, is to listen without bias. So I think वो जो इतने सारे मैंने narratives over the years सुने हैं, इतनी conversations की हैं, have told my side of the story, gotten feedback on that. What it has really made me is a very, very good listener and an empath, which I think is a very crucial skill in today's day and age.
आई थिंक ये एम्पथी जो एक ऐसा रिसोर्स है ना, जो आप कभी भी अपने जर्नलिस्टिक दोस्तों के साथ बैठे हो तो आपको काफी ज्यादा लगता है कि हाँ ये मेरा जोन है, बिकॉज everyone is quite open towards different perspectives. Like obviously while working, for years and years, we all have opinions. It's not like we don't have biases, but ये मुझे definitely लगता है कि sometimes like it's easiest to speak to like journalists, especially off the record, of course, where you're not freaking out about being on camera. कि आपको ये होता है कि ये शायद different perspectives सुन लेंगे. Like, and I feel like sometimes I feel like, I mean, I make documentaries now, but my background is very much in journalism. Sometimes I feel like even in like family conversations, like there's more sakat to listen to just different perspectives which you might otherwise completely disagree with, but आपको थोड़ा सा ना take लगा के सुनना आता है कि अच्छा अच्छा, ये बात कह रहे हैं. So I think that's really like a, it's an
It's a
occupational
superpower.
yeah,
It's a superpower.
it's a superpower. Sometimes it starts feeling like a bit of an occupational hazard कि यार इतनी empathy मतलब क्या कर रहे हो. but it is like it's quite a tool. Like it really is like, I mean it's an asset to have for sure. So, Sarah, you were in America 2015 onwards. उस वक्त पाकिस्तान की किस तरह की पॉलिटिकल मतलब पॉलिटिकल lay of the land में किस तरह की जगह थी in America? Like what kind of baggage were you going with in a way?
So I'll backtrack a little bit. When I was talking about my baggage, that's when I went to grad school, which was 2011 to 12. And that's when the security situation was really, really bad. Like, जब उसके बाद मैं पाकिस्तान वापस आई हूँ 2012 से 2015 तक, that's when I worked at Tribune. And that also was not a great time. Like APS happened at that time. We were still really struggling with whatever that Pakistan-Afghan border, residue was, कि जो security challenges थे, वो सब थे. And I got like a front row seat into a lot of those disturbing stories. और मैं सिर्फ security के point of view से बात कर रही हूँ, जो political turmoil था, I don't think that has ever ended for us. So I don't even know whether to comment on it. And I feel like the reason I eventually decided to leave again in 2015 was because I had so much fatigue from, this kind of trauma facing news coverage. एक रीजन ये था, दूसरा रीजन ये था कि मैं डिजिटल जर्नलिज्म पढ़ के आई थी एंड आई वांटेड टू डू अ लॉट ऑफ tech based innovations in the newsroom, which I don't think the newsrooms over here were ready for. Or I think in like that's completely fair because हमारे पास जो infrastructure है और जो हमारी news coverage का हाल है, we're already stretched so thin just trying to do justice to our stories that thinking about innovation or thinking about telling these stories differently वो बहुत पीछे रह जाता है. And our industry is really over here. It's really, when I say scrapped for money, it's really, really scrapped for money because एक बार जब मैं यहाँ से बाहर गई हूँ और मैंने बाहर काम किया, I realized कि हम यहाँ पे एक एक बंदा 10 लोगों का काम करता है.
But
And really, the journalists who are driving the newsrooms here, they are doing it just out of sheer love and passion for what they do. Because in terms of like what you're up against, what you see on a daily basis, things that you can never forget, images that you can never forget, a lot of journalists literally put their life on the line. Like when I was at Tribune, there was a grenade attack in the office and we were all
yeah,
there. But as like a 20 something, that's not something that you ever think you'll experience.
yeah,
And then to choose to stay on and like, continue this work, you really have to, at some level, love what you're doing. And जो भी ये काम इस मुल्क में कर रहा है वो बहुत brave है. I think we cannot thank them enough because what we end up seeing is a much more filtered version of what journalists have to go through and see and make sense of before they present those stories to you. So जब मैं 2015 में मैंने ये decision इसलिए लिया था कि I was not being able to do the kind of work that I was doing, and at some level I think I was fatigued by how demanding it had gotten here. Um, and I think I still had that New York itch. I'm someone who always want to compete on like global levels. I'm like one of those people. So I was like, okay, मैंने यहाँ पे, I've done enough work. I had done like 6 to 7 years of journalism here. I've done good work. It's like I want to now go to an international market and see how things are being done there and see, if I'm good enough. And उस उम्र में, validation भी एक बहुत important चीज होती है. You really want to make it everywhere. New York, in that sense, is the city. So that's when I decided to like go back. And फिर 2015 में मैं New York गई थी. But I was trying to escape all this crazy like news trauma, but I landed up in breaking newsrooms during the Trump presidency in the US. So then I think I was like, let's just stop trying to run from it. It's my fate. Let's embrace it.
इसलिए हाँ, ट्रॉमा ही ट्रॉमा, इधर से गए तो कहीं और जाके फंसे. और अभी सारा
But I feel like I should, or maybe journalists are attracted to it, right? That's where good stories are. That's where there is potential to do good work, there is potential to do different work. So I think things that are chaotic or things that are broken or things that are a little bit messy, we naturally gravitate towards that.
And it's not like things have stopped being messy, right? मतलब chaos तो दुनिया में और इतनी destruction है कि somebody has to do the job of journalism as well. हम सिर्फ इस बुनियाद पे तो रुक नहीं सकते कि ट्रॉमा हो जाएगा, क्योंकि जो लोग उस जिंदगी को में रहते हैं, जिनके पास मतलब कोई स्केप रूट नहीं होता, हम तो एक जगह पे जाते हैं, स्टोरी कवर करके निकल आते हैं, लेकिन जो लोग वहां पे रहते हैं, इवन इस वक्त जो हम देख रहे हैं पैलेस्टाइन में फॉर एग्जांपल, जो लोग वहां पे रह के स्टोरीज पूरी दुनिया से शेयर कर रहे हैं, मतलब वो तो यू लाइक आई मतलब देयर आर नो वर्ड्स टू बी सेड अबाउट द courage and the consistency with which someone has to just do it because somebody has to do it, to
Somebody has
document
to
this
do it.
moment in the history.
Yeah.
You said that there was this technological revolution happening around the time you were doing your masters in journalism. This is around 2011 2012, और नए tools आ रहे थे उस वक्त स्टोरी टेलिंग के, जर्नलिस्टिक स्टोरी टेलिंग के लिए। क्योंकि दुनिया पिछले 10-11 सालों में इतनी तेजी से चेंज हुई है, और अब बहुत से लोगों के पास एक स्मार्टफोन होता है, और यही मेरे भी साल हैं ग्रेड स्कूल के, और सबके पास स्मार्टफोन भी नहीं होता था और व्हाट्सएप भी नहीं इजाद हुआ था। तो मैं आपसे थोड़ा सा ये रिक्वेस्ट करूंगी कि आप जरा उस दुनिया में लेके जाएं कि उस वक्त कौन कौन सी चीजें नई हो रही थी, जिनको अब तो परहैप्स एक नया कंज्यूमर ऑफ मीडिया शायद दे वुड टेक इट फॉर ग्रांटेड, बट what all was new that was happening while you were going in to study journalism thinking ke duniya वैसी रहेगी?
I think I'll just give you one example, and that should tell you how new everything was. Like in my master's program, there was a course that taught us how to use social media. Like उसके अंदर हमें Twitter को कैसे इस्तेमाल करना है. Instagram तो was not on the scene at all. And even Facebook was not being used as a journalism tool. It was only Twitter, which was that kind of a tool जहाँ पे intellectual discourse होता था, और it was used as a discovery tool for news and all of that. तो हमें literally एक 3 महीने का कोर्स पढ़ाया गया था on how to use Twitter, and it was a very new thing for us because it was this new playing field जहाँ पे आप कुछ भी कह सकते हो, कुछ भी बोल सकते हो, उसको कैसे वेरीफाई करना है, उसको कैसे रिपोर्ट करना है, किसको ट्रस्ट करना है, किसको नहीं ट्रस्ट करना, how much of your voice should come through, how much of it should just be the person who's tweeting. Like all of this was a whole new ecosystem, but it was fascinating because you went from like, I mean, we were being trained on the traditional tools also, okay, uh, like the basics of reporting, writing, how to operate a camera, edit, this, that. But then there was this very small stream of working with these new media tools, and not a lot of people were even thinking about it. Like एक course था, I think मुझे जितना मुझे याद है, जिसमें we were being taught how to report for like digital journalism, like how to report for online mediums, and that essentially was limited to just websites. तो उसको कैसे tackle करना है, how to set up a website, SEO, this, that, और हमारे लिए like our minds were blown. We're like, what is this beast? How do we do this? Um, and fast forward 10, 12 years, like now we use it as a sixth sense, right? Like in चीजों के बगैर तो operating as a journalist is impossible. But I think in that sense, my generation is unique because we've seen the time before that जब आप wires monitor करते थे और wires से आपको पता चलता था, and that translated to like Twitter feeds, and then it eventually transitioned where Twitter became kind of like this platform where everybody was speaking instead of giving press conferences or news bites to channels. You had world leaders coming to the platform and making announcements. Policy decisions were being, announced on the platform. So in that sense, I think I've really seen it go all the way. And now to a point where these things are again, I think, going through a bit of a transformation because of all these conversations, rightful conversations around censorship, around algorithm bias, and ये चीजें उस time पे नहीं थी, but as our usage has become nuanced, we've also started questioning on how these tools are being built.
अब तो मतलब न्यूज़ वेबसाइट्स पे कोई जाता नहीं है, अब तो उनके उनके इंस्टाग्राम पेज और उनके ट्विटर प्रोफाइल से इंफॉर्मेशन मिल रही होती है। और मुझे याद है कि उस टाइम पे डीएसएलआर रेवोल्यूशन भी आ रही थी, तो हम डीबी टेप से जो है ना वो मेमोरी कार्ड की तरफ जा रहे थे, जिससे भी जिंदगी एकदम बदल गई थी कि ओ वाओ, सो यू कैन रियली डब द फुटेज एंड देन यू कैन स्टार्ट एडिटिंग इट, देयर इज नो इंजेस्टिंग। देयर वाज एन इंजेस्टिंग सिचुएशन दैट यूज्ड टू हैपन अदरवाइज। तो वाकई दुनिया बदली है, और आपको सोच के अपना आप भी कितना कभी कभी एंशियंट लगता है कि हम क्या कर रहे थे उस वक्त। सीरियसली हमें ट्विटर चलाना सिखाया जा रहा था कोर्स में। और अब तो as teachers also, like I get a bit violated if someone tells me that they don't use TikTok, and I'm just like, what do you mean you don't use TikTok? so like मतलब वो काफी एक उसकी जो हमारी क्या कहते हैं डबल स्टैंडर्ड्स है वो सामने आ रहे हैं। तो आपने आपने ये सब पढ़ा, उसके बाद आप वापस आए एंड यू आर राइटली सेइंग दैट ऑब्वियसली यहाँ के न्यूज रूम्स में कुछ और ही चल रहा था, क्योंकि यहाँ मुल्क में ही कुछ और चल रहा था, थोड़ा हंगामा था, which was also reflected in the newsroom, and yet people were soldiering on and people were doing amazing journalism. But obviously अब हम हमारे न्यूज रूम में तो हर बार तो तनख्वाह भी टाइम पे नहीं मिलती, तो इनोवेटिव टूल्स का आना तो एक बहुत ही यानी अभी भी एक देरीना ख्वाब है।
Yes.
What drove you to go to New York, and where did you end up working?
Hmm. I think essentially it was this itch to be, working on a more global platform. And I love New York as a city. I have a very special place for, and I think as Karachiites, maybe you also feel the same way, but there's very similar energy that both cities have. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of gandagi, there's a lot of diversity. It's predominantly made up of immigrants, which makes the city very, very interesting. And I felt like, there was more that I needed to do there. So I left on a whim, just knowing that I wanted to like go back there and work there. And I got very lucky that matlab, within 3 to 6 months of moving back, I landed a job at Facebook, which is Meta now. Uh, and once again, my reason for working there was the same. I think I've always gravitated towards innovation. I wouldn't say technology because I'm not a technical person, but for me, anyone who's doing things differently, I find that fascinating. चाहे वो कोई भी ट्रेडिशनल प्रॉब्लम को लेके डिफरेंट तरीके से सॉल्व कर रहा हो या कोई बिल्कुल नई चीज कर रहा हो, आई जस्ट इंस्टेंटली want in on the action. So Meta or Facebook at that time was the big thing, and they were setting up a news team. So I was part of their news team for a year. Then I moved on to Twitter, where I was also on their news team. I worked there for 3 years, and that was essentially like a breaking news team. It was spread over like I think it was in 7 languages, and our team was spread over 7 countries. So I was part of the North American team. It was a very, very interesting time because I saw Trump getting elected. I was on the US politics coverage during his presidency, and what nobody saw coming was how the president of the free world would start to use Twitter. Or काफी मजे की चीज थी that Trump would wake up and start tweeting at 7 a.m. and my shift used to start at 6. So somehow all of the Trump stories landed onto my lap, which I found fascinating, to be honest. Like they were very complicated stories to navigate, but also like it was just something that I never imagined I would be doing. And then I also had a very unique perspective to it because a lot of the stuff that he was saying was about immigrants. I was an immigrant. He was disrespecting women. I was a woman. He was disrespecting Muslims. I was a Muslim. So it really taught me how to keep my feelings and really practice my journalistic hat, regardless of what I was feeling. Outside of that coverage. But I think it really sharpened my instincts of, okay, I have to look at it from a policy point of view. I have to look at it from a legal point of view. And you learn to separate your feelings from the story, which is not easy. But I think it was an invaluable experience. And then I was also in the newsroom when COVID broke. So उस टाइम पे भी एक बहुत ही कुछ the world made no sense, like, and as a platform where everybody was sharing, falane ko ho gaya, they might make it, they might not make it, and to make sure that it was not sensationalist, it was still factual, because our stories were read by millions of readers. So there was no room for error that we could make. Not to say कि नहीं होती थी गलतियां यहाँ and वहाँ, but the pressure was really high. It was a really fast moving environment, like just like social media is.
Sarah, you were saying that you had these uh, bizarre moments where Donald Trump was tweeting at 7 in the morning and your shift started at 6 a.m. What exactly was your job as a journalist on Twitter? Because जब हम Twitter सोचते हैं तो हमें लगता है कि वहाँ पे तो journalists already अपनी खबरें पोस्ट कर रहे होते हैं. But you were employed by Twitter to do journalistic work. How does this work out?
So let me clarify that a little bit, because the product that I was working on, it was called Twitter Moments, and it was rolled out in I think if I'm not mistaken, over 25, 30 countries, but Pakistan was not on that list. So it might not have been visible to somebody using the platform from Pakistan. And essentially, the idea was that the company had recruited a team of journalists to verify a lot of fact check, verify, and contextualize the breaking news stories that happen on the platform like every single hour. So if अगर आप Twitter पे देखेंगे, आपके left side hand side पे trends होते हैं. If you click on that trend, you will see like a bunch of tweets. उसमें से कुछ सही होती हैं, कुछ fake news होती है, कुछ propaganda होता है. So our job as a journalist was to first verify if that was a real world event, fact check it, associate the right voices, and then contextualize and write a summary so that anybody who comes onto the platform is not misled by what that means. So you could just go onto that tab and really just read through the story. So that's where our job was. And the product that I worked on at Facebook was also very similar, because as these were social media platforms, there was like a massive influx of information and at one point, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, all of these things became really big issues because it was essentially unfiltered. But जो आपकी बड़ी news stories होती हैं, they have a very big risk if they're not contextualized. So as a platform, they took responsibility of contextualizing, fact checking, and verifying those stories.
मुझे आप ये बताएं, आपने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बताया था कि आप जब ट्विटर पे काम करती थी और उस वक्त अमेरिका में पॉलिटिकल और एक तरह से सोशल क्लाइमेट कुछ इस तरह का था कि जो जो आप थी, एक औरत, एक ब्राउन औरत, एक ब्राउन मुसलमान औरत, आपकी तरह के लोगों की आइडेंटिटी पे बहुत हमले हो रहे थे 2016 वाले टाइम पे. और आपने कहा कि बहुत मुश्किल होता है अपने इमोशनल रिस्पॉन्स को साइड पे रख के खबरों को खबरों के तौर पे टैकल करना, स्पेशली व्हेन यू आर इन अ फैक्ट चेकिंग टीम फॉर एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. Tell me how you were able to achieve it, because you said that you were able to separate the two. How did you do it? And like, was it a painful process? To me it sounds like पता नहीं क्या हुआ होगा उसको achieve करने में.
I think that's where my education, I would say, I would credit my education over there, because there was so much training that we had on, separating your emotions from the subject, what is okay, what is not okay, how much you can get involved. We were taught a lot about conflict reporting. We were taught a lot about agenda-based reporting. So I think that's really where the technical side of journalism kicked in. But I won't discount the fact that it was difficult. What did make it slightly easier was how insane Trump was. Like, it wasn't a well-cloaked person saying all these nasty things. It was somebody that was ridiculous, and it was quite obvious in plain sight. So आपको वो वाली battle नहीं लड़नी पड़ी थी, which would have been much harder. Was he packaged differently, or was he doing these things differently? Even the kind of tweets that he sent out at some points, there was a lot of I think humor. I found a lot of humor in it. I was also very we were all, not just me, I think we were all very fascinated by how he was using the platform. Nobody saw it coming, and no one thought, "Okay, this is what it's gonna." Yes, it was a very influential platform. People used it for many different things, but to see the leader of the free world, question China, threaten Russia, just like call people names on a public platform. तो अगर वो कोई डिप्लोमेटिक या वेल नुआंस्ड कोई नैरेटिव होता जिसके अंडरटोन्स होते और वो अंडरटोन सिर्फ मैं फील कर सकती थी बिकॉज ऑफ माय बैकग्राउंड, दैट वुड हैव बीन much harder to maybe explain, but because he was so ridiculous, it just almost became funny. And then the other part that offset was that things like the Me Too movement that also started on Twitter. So in addition to having covering all of this, we did get to see the other side of how people were using the same tool. And it was immensely rewarding. It was like I think a front row seat into how these tools can become like a tool for collective activism, for social activism. Women were speaking, minorities were speaking. It has been the platform has been a home to a lot of LGBT advocates. So I think उससे थोड़ा सा offset हो जाता because अगर हम दिन रात सिर्फ ट्रम्प को cover करते रहते तो that would not have been good for anybody.
ब्रेन फ्राई हो चुका होता मेरे ख्याल में. नॉट दैट वो उस
Yeah.
वक्त नहीं हुआ होगा, बट इट वुड बीन more terrible. And I also, I was smiling when you said that you were able to find humor in it, because I feel like if you are a Pakistani journalist trained in Pakistan, like your other superpower is that you can really you can find humor in dark stuff. मतलब इसमें तो हमारी
Yes.
एक्सपर्टीज है ना, कि जो हो रहा है आपको होता है कि अच्छा सही है. न्यूज रूम ह्यूमर इन पाकिस्तान is like a whole other genre. Like it's a एक तो न्यूज रूम कल्चर अराउंड द वर्ल्ड है, न्यूज रूम ह्यूमर, बट देन आई थिंक पाकिस्तानी न्यूज रूम ह्यूमर इज लाइक ऑन अनदर लेवल ऑफ लाइक ड्राइनेस, सरकाजम. बात कह भी दी जाती है और पता भी नहीं चलता कि कहीं गई है.
Yep.
It's
Yeah, had I gone from like a more protected and sheltered newsroom, maybe शायद मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा shock लगता. But having seen everything that we see here on a daily basis, I was kind of amazed क्योंकि हमें लगता है कि पाकिस्तान में people say all of these ridiculous things, and they have no regard for consequence, or they don't think about the history. But I was like, I'm here in like ग्लोबल सुपर पावर, उनका लीडर अगर ये बात कर सकता है, essentially power dynamics then everywhere are the same. People, once they come to power, they think they can get away with anything. And I think human nature की वो जो एक universality है ना, वो आपको नजर आ जाती है, how power corrupts and how it kind of makes you a little bit insane, I think.
he made me at least feel a little bit better about being in Pakistan, because मुझे था कि यार उधर भी यही हो रहा है, तो फिर हम अपनी जबान बोल के कम से कम यहाँ पे ठीक है. So that was something. So on an everyday basis, ऑब्वियसली हर कोई जर्नलिस्ट नहीं होता, हर कोई ट्रेन नहीं होता, हर कोई जर्नलिस्ट बनना भी नहीं चाहता. लेकिन अब 10 साल बाद दुनिया इस तरह की हो गई कि हम यूट्यूब पे भी कोई क्लिक बेटी किस्म की वीडियो का नाम देखते हैं तो हमें ये होता है कि यार पता नहीं ये सही है या नहीं. राइट, इवन दीज क्लेम्स दैट आर बीइंग मेड इन पाकिस्तान के घर बैठे इतने लाख रुपए महीने में कमाए. राइट, जस्ट दिस मॉर्निंग आई वाज टॉकिंग टू माय मॉम एंड शी वाज सेइंग कि ये जो इतनी वीडियोस आती हैं ये ठीक है या नहीं, ये क्या लोग कमा रहे हैं पैसे इससे, ये क्या हो रहा है. राइट, सो टेल मी अ लिटिल बिट सारा, कि अगर कोई हमारी इस वक्त बात सुन रहा है और बेसिक लेवल पे एक आइडिया लेना चाहता है या एक बेसिक सीखना चाहता है कि भाई मुझे मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन, डिसइंफॉर्मेशन, प्रोपेगेंडा, फेक न्यूज का कुछ फर्क समझ में आ जाए, या मैं इतना डिजिटली और मीडिया वाइज लिटरेट हो जाऊं कि मुझे थोड़ा थोड़ा फर्क समझ में आ जाए, जर्नलिस्ट ना बनना पड़े उस काम के लिए, बट एक समझ आ जाए कि क्या झूठ है और क्या आधा सच है और क्या शायद पूरा सच है, तो वो क्या करे. लाइक एन ऑर्डिनरी यंग पर्सन, ऑर्डिनरी elderly person sitting at home consuming all of this content, like is it possible to learn it? Like how like obviously it's difficult, but like how do we become more savvy that way?
I think what you're talking about is ethical and informed consumption of media, and it's not just limited to the news. I think even entertainment, and this is really going to, it's not going to get better. It's really just going to get more and more out of hand, especially with AI. अब तो आपको एक altered, एक deep fake और एक original video के बीच में भी फर्क नहीं पता चल सकता to an ordinary eye unless you're looking for it or you're trained to look for it. But there's a few things that is literally due diligence that we should all do as for our own mental sanity when we consume any kind of media is to look at sources. आप किस कहाँ से वो information आ रही है, आप किसका perspective पढ़ रहे हैं, उनका क्या background है, whether it's coming from like a media outlet, is it coming from a journalist? And then even with journalists, not all of them are completely agenda free. So you have to know what organizations they are tied to, who are those organizations funded by, उनका क्या past record रहा है, उन्होंने past में इन issues को कैसे cover किया, even अगर आप ये Palestine का issue ले लें. You have to look at historical coverage. New York Times अगर आज नहीं cover कर रहा Israel Palestine को, that's because historically they haven't covered it, and there's good reason, and it usually, unfortunately, all comes down to money. So as ethical consumers, it's very, very important for us to look at whose voices we are listening to, what their agenda may or may not be, always going and cross-checking something with, people that you trust. And it's not like it's all bad, right? There are great news organizations that have been doing responsible work for a very long time. But आपकी news consumption cannot be from the global north. You also have to offset it by, watching Al Jazeera. You have to watch your local news coverage. You have to watch Indian channels because दुनिया is an amalgamation of all of these perspectives. अगर हम एक ही उन्हीं CNN और BBC और न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स को सुनते रहेंगे तो आपका खुद का भी दिमाग, you start thinking like that. So as consumers, there's responsibility on us also, to question the sources, make sure that we're consuming from a diverse range, and then lastly, look at the person standing. आप किसी भी बंदे का, not every XYZ claiming to be on ground, sharing trauma porn or sharing, graphic images. Not all of that is accurate. It's not verified. So go to journalists who usually have a blue tick. उनकी feed देखें, उनकी description देखें, उनकी past reporting देखें, and then formulate your opinions. It's very easy to be like trigger happy, watch something that invokes an emotion, send it to 10 people, but you're just doing more damage than good. So yeah, I think these are like some tips that I practice just to be more like ethical and intentional about who I'm listening to, whose perspective I'm reading, what I'm endorsing.
Absolutely, हाँ कुछ mindfulness practice हो सकती है इस तरह while consuming news. And you were obviously also there when COVID broke out, but then eventually you did come to Pakistan, and I'd love to know, first I'd love to know how like how difficult or challenging was it for you to leave everything and come here, because you have really come around a time where Pakistan is going through yet another crisis, but this time the crisis is purely economic. मतलब बाकी मसले जैसे आपने कहा politics तो चलती रहती है, but there's really there's you can't ignore the fact that we are economically, financially a mess right now. And to kind of leave everything and come here, sounds difficult to do. Uh, what were you going through when you made this move, and what led you to make this move?
The reason for coming back, like it was a personal decision. I wanted to be closer to my family, or I came in like the heart of COVID, which was June of 2020. तो उस time पे तो पता भी नहीं था, how long this will last. There were barely any flights. So I really just took a plunge, and I just knew that I wanted to be closer to home. Everything was closed off even over there, so we were all working from home anyways. But I think जब मैं आई हूँ 2020 or 2021, the economic situation was actually not as bad. 2020, especially up until the end of 2021, was in fact, very good for venture capital and the startup space. And very early on, right after, I'll backtrack a little bit, but right after I moved back, the first question was, okay, ab main karun kya? What do I do? What's next for me? And one thing that I was sure of at that time was that I didn't want to go back to a newsroom, and I didn't want to go back to things that I'd already done here. So I had 7 years of journalism here. I had done like my fair share there. And it's not until I actually stepped out of the newsroom and I was like, I'm pretty burnt out, like from reading and consuming. And COVID especially was really, really tough because it broke out so quickly. It got out of hand so quickly. And then the initial level of like, जो North America में deaths थी, जो medical supplies का हाल था, and then add to it your own personal uncertainty, it just really, I think, drained me. So I didn't want to go back to a newsroom. But then once again, I was like, okay, so let me look for people who are now once again trying to do something different. And I ended up actually attending an entrepreneurship summit, which was for women. And that's how I got into the startup space. And वहाँ पे मैंने जो talent देखा ना, there were a lot of people who had come back home, who were trying to solve very old, हमारी जो inherited problems हैं of like finance, of healthcare, of retail, वो इन सारी problems को tech के lens से solve करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे, एक different तरीके से solve करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे. So I was like, okay, this is a promising space. And the second part of that was, okay, so how do I use my skills to like kind of bring this together? And then that's when I realized, my communication skills, it's very multifaceted. Also like the kind of experience that I've had across continents, that came in handy. And then I eventually joined a women's health and wellness startup called ApeFit. I was one of the founding members. वहाँ पे मैंने 2 साल काम किया. And that gave me a very different lens on gender, first of all, on what women in this country are up against. And then secondly, जो हमारे general health का हाल है इस मुल्क में, just how unhealthy we are as a nation. And it's not just physical health, but it also, like, I think it's all encompassing. It also impacts your mental health. हमें लगता है कि movement or, being active is just about losing weight or being a certain size. या अगर आप बीमार हो गए, तो then as something that is a precaution or something to come back from. But it's actually the other way around. If you can manage to find that mind-body connection, that doesn't come in the first month or 2 months. It takes a while to build. But if you do that, your quality of life, your cognitive skills, they improve immensely. आपकी old age, your protection from disease, like it's all correlated. But unfortunately, as a nation, health is very, very low in our priorities. और especially जब इस तरह का economic crunch होता है, जब महंगाई इतनी है, we're in a very abysmal situation. The first thing that people do is they cut down on their health expense, which is kind of tragic because that is your one ally to get through all of this. If you're not in good health, if you're not sharp in your mind, if you're not fit in your body, navigating all of this just becomes twice as hard.
And Sarah, you have also been running marathons. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into it, and why are you running them? I think that's what I would love to know.
So I ran my first marathon in October this year in Amsterdam, and it was my first one, but I've been a runner for a while. And I also got into running not by accident, but I told you that I've always been an overweight kid, an overweight teenager, have had a very complicated relationship with my body. And I think it defined who I was for a large period of my life. Or running was, like most people, it was something that I wanted to do to lose weight. But just along the way, I realized how grounded it made me. Like every time I was outdoor, it allowed me to be outdoor, which I love. And then just it made me feel free, which is something that you don't really experience that much as a woman in Pakistan. You don't get to access public spaces. You don't get to be outdoor as much. तो वो जो एक फीलिंग थी ना फ्रीडम की, आई थिंक आई गॉट addicted to that. और फिर जब कोविड हुआ, it gave me like that space to run more consistently, run more regularly. तो बस वहां से मेरा मेरा शौक जो है शुरू हुआ. एंड आई यूज्ड टू बी अ सोलो रनर व्हेन आई लिव्ड इन न्यूयॉर्क. आई वुड रन विद पीपल हियर एंड देयर, बट मोस्टली आई वाज अ सोलो रनर. और जब मैं पाकिस्तान वापस आई हूँ, आई थिंक वन ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट रियली helped me get through that transition of this really big move was finding these communities. So I'm part of a running community here. And I think it was the community aspect of it that really made me fall in love with the sport, because I saw people from such different backgrounds who had nothing in common, much older. When you think of runners, you think of like these super fit young kids, but this community, majority of the runners are over 40. I saw older women. I saw people from different backgrounds just coming together for a passion for this sport. And I think that's the beauty of sport, right? You start to speak this common language. And for me, there was a lot of nostalgia associated with the activity. Like, that was something I used to do, and it was something that I could transfer and bring with me over here. बस वहीं से शुरू हुआ. And then I think doing a marathon was like a personal milestone of mine. And I signed up for it not knowing what it would look like. मुझसे होगा भी या नहीं होगा, training कैसी होगी. Because the most I had done at that point was 21, and a full is 42 kilometers. So, but I was like, एक दफा, how bad can it be? Let me just sign up and do it. And Alhamdulillah, I did it this year. And now that I've done it, I feel like this is something that I want to carry with me and do my entire life. Because once again, it is a very physical act, but the kind of mental grit it takes to run for 4 hours. आपकी बॉडी तो पहले 10-15 किलोमीटर के बाद नम हो जाती है, राइट? उसके then it's just your head that keeps you going.
Yeah.
And that's where you really discover what you're made of, your strength, how far you can go, how you speak to yourself. Because the minute I tell myself I can't do it, my body also stops. I
Right.
can't do it.
Right.
But if I can tell myself that I can keep going. And during training, there were like many rough moments. I mean, there were a lot of instances where I felt sick. I physically felt nauseous. I felt like I couldn't go on. But then, and I know this sounds very cheesy, but like when you overcome that physical barrier, it gives you this weird strength and confidence of being able to do other tough things. I
Right.
think that courage for me that I have acquired on the running course, I've seen that translated to other parts of my life. So I feel like for me, that's the biggest value.
And how does one train for a marathon in a place like Karachi, जहाँ मुझे तो सोच के लगता है कि कहाँ कैसे भागते हैं और कहाँ भागा जाता है?
So for a marathon, because it's long distance, you have to do road running. Matlab you can do some sessions in a park or in a closed space, but because the distance is so much, आपने 30-35 किलोमीटर भागना है, आपको पार्क में तो there's आप पागल हो जाओगे. So that's where the community element really helps. And हमने जो ट्रेनिंग की थी वो extreme heat में की थी, June, July, August. So the weather was also not in our favor, but we used to start really early morning. So I've started at 4:30 a.m., 4:45. And you get to see a really different side of the city.
Yeah.
लोग वापस घर जा रहे होते हैं और आप अपनी lunch start कर रहे होते हैं. And गर्मी, there'll be people who will be like ogling at you, chasing you, even at 5 a.m. There is stray dogs. It's actually quite funny. Like, I mean, if I try and explain this to somebody else who's not a Pakistani or not a Karachiite, actually, will not get it. But ये हमारे challenges थे.
कुत्ते कुत्ते
But
भी हैं, इंसान भी भाग रहे हैं, वो
भाग रहे
आपके
हैं, कुत्ते आपको चेस कर रहे हैं, फिर कुत्ते नहीं है तो आदमी आपको चेस कर रहे हैं. Then you have to be very mindful of what you're wearing on the streets.
Right.
You're fully covered while training in extreme heat, whereas the men just take their shirts off. They do whatever they need to.
Right.
So obviously वो सारे challenges हैं, लेकिन I think two things help. The community element of it really helps. And then I just think the reward, the dopamine that it triggers within you, वो जो एक reward signal होता है ना आपके brain का, वो इतना powerful होता है कि you get addicted to it. So I think that's what we're all chasing at the end of it.
No, but also like big Mubarak on finishing your first marathon, like
Thank
it's
you.
I think
Thank
it's
you.
it's fascinating. Not everyone can do it, and the fact that you have chosen to do it for your own self. मतलब अब मुझे एक इत्मीनान है कि because she's done her marathon, she can now do more amazing work in other fields because अब तो ये करेंगी क्योंकि इनका marathon हो गया. So on a very selfish level also, I'm just like बहुत अच्छा किया. अब she can do other work also. You had shared with me that you were taking a bit of a thinking and reflecting break in a way, and you're figuring out what is it that you really want to do, and you may have also arrived at some answers about what kind of things you want to do, but um, ऑब्वियसली दुनिया भी एक कैपिटलिस्ट दुनिया है, तो हम जब किसी से खैरियत पूछते हैं, उससे नाम पूछते हैं, किसी नए बंदे से भी मिलते हैं, और फिर हम अगला सवाल ये पूछते हैं कि आप क्या करते हैं, राइट? तो हमें बहुत कम ऐसे लोग मिलते हैं जो ये कहें कि भाई आजकल तो मैं कुछ नहीं कर रहा, क्योंकि दुनिया भी रेडी नहीं होती उस आंसर को ऑब्जॉर्व करने के लिए, तो लोग भी ये बात कहते कम है कि भाई अभी तो हम नहीं कर रहे कुछ इस वक्त, जो करना है
Yeah.
करो, राइट? बट यू आर एक्चुअली टेकिंग अ बिट ऑफ अ पॉज. I don't want to ask you what is it that you want to do because you may not have answers, you may also have answers, but I really want to learn from you how you have navigated this potentially odd space of not doing something as a woman who may have actually derived a lot of strength and a lot of like identity about who you are from the work that you have done over these past years, right? हम भी किसी से हम भी अपने आप को इंट्रोड्यूस कराते हैं तो हम अक्सर अपने प्रोफेशन का ही नाम बताते हैं, चाहे औरतें हो चाहे मर्द हो. हाउ आर यू लाइक हाउ आर यू ट्राइंग टू नेविगेट दिस स्पेस कि अगर कोई काम आप एक पॉइंट पे नहीं कर रहे, तो फिर आप क्या हैं? इसका जवाब लाइक हाउ आर यू ट्राइंग टू फिगर इट आउट?
हाँ, सबसे पहले तो I think being able to take a break from work is an immense privilege. Like right off the bat, I want to say that if
फॉर श्योर.
there are people who have to pay the bills, there are people who are taking care of their families, और हर किसी के पास ये liberty नहीं होती कि भाई मैं 2-3 महीने I just want to figure out what I'm doing next. Having said that, I do think, and I firmly believe now more than ever, that one should take these pauses, if not every couple of years, at least every decade, because it's not essentially taking a break. It's kind of, it's a period of reflection. And then it's also, I think I see it a way of honoring your growth also, because like things that I wanted to do 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and things that I want to do now are very, very different. But if I don't sit and critically examine कि भाई मुझे करना क्या है और मुझे क्यों करना है, और मैं जो कर रही थी वो मैं क्यों कर रही थी, because your north star in different parts of your life is also very different. In your early 20s you're working for different reasons, in your early 30s वो अलग होता है, and so on and so forth. मगर हम I think या तो इसको इतना सीरियसली नहीं लेते, या हमारे बहुत लोगों के पास लिबर्टी नहीं होती, या we're just, I think we're just programmed to constantly be on the go, be productive. And you're right, I've derived my identity for almost as long as I remember from my profession. I never I never really define any other part of my personality besides my profession. Which brings me to a really interesting instance of, like, I met someone and they were like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, Falana, I do this. And she was like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, what do you like to do? And I was like, okay, I've never really thought of that question as what do I like to do? हम तो बस हमारा default mode होता है ना कि this is what I do for a living and this is who I am. So, long story short, because I've done so many different kinds of things in the past decade, I have had a lot of different experiences. I just feel like I have to step into the next season or the next decade of my life with more intention. I would like to do that with more intention. I would also like to do that with more clarity. And then I'm also taking this time to upskill myself a little bit, because दुनिया जितनी तेजी से change हो रही है, either you keep up with it, or in the next 5 to 7 years, we'll realize that a lot of what we know is obsolete. I'm already feeling that way. So in order to remain in sync with what's happening at large, you might not do it directly, but there's so much innovation, there is so much good work, there is also so much critical thinking that gets brushed under the carpet because आप 9 to 5 कर रहे हैं, आप अपने industry में इतने absorbed हैं. I haven't really thought about anything besides what I was doing for a living. So that is really my intention behind this. One of the reasons was also running this marathon, which you pointed out. Now it's done, that milestone is over. So I have more open space. And another thing that I would like to add is it's important to keep it time pegged. Like it's very easy to slip into, okay, no, I'm not feeling it yet. Okay, I'm not feeling it yet. But while it's important to take a pause, it's also important to continue to move. Because एक point के बाद वो inertia आ जाता है, फिर then you tend to start overthinking, or you start to get paralyzed by possibilities. So I'm not saying land a full-time gig and just get into a job within 3 months, but at least start moving again. Pause, but that pause has to be time pegged because otherwise it becomes hard to come back from it. Not कि आपको justify करना पड़ेगा अपने employer को या next इंसान को, but आपके लिए खुद के लिए coming out of that space, then that becomes harder.
Exactly. I think which is why there is some reason in when they say harkat mein barkat hai, because actually hai, you keep moving,
Yeah.
and not like you don't have to move fast, but I mean, there's value in also
Exactly.
keeping
Yeah.
keeping some movement, alive. But whatever it is that you think you want to do, and I hope it's like multiple different things. I and I think anyone who listens to this conversation would love to wish you the bestest of luck for it. We really really hope that you really um, uh, move into the next decade of your life with a lot more meaning, and also like a lot more like compassion towards yourself as well. And thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing all of this time with me. मुझे तो बहुत मजा आया बातें सुन के, और it was also fun talking to a journalist because I could also track my own steps, in the past. So it was also very nostalgic for me. मैं आपका बहुत शुक्रिया कि आपने इतना टाइम निकाला और हमसे बातें की. And I have a strong feeling that a lot of people, especially a lot of women, are going to actually be able to learn and just reflect on a lot of different things through the conversation that you have had here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Haya. Thank you for all the thoughtful questions. And I really enjoyed the conversation. And just going back to what we were talking about, I would like to close on the fact that हमें लगता है कि it's very hard to enjoy your work, but I feel like as I'm getting older, what I'm trying to look for is that sweet spot where, I can do things that I'm good at while also feeling good. So wo jo ek sweet spot hai, it's very hard, it's very complicated, it's not that accessible, and it might not even happen immediately for me or for people who are very young, but I think that's a really healthy aspiration to have for yourself. So anyone who's in the workforce or is entering the workforce, I think that's a good dream, or that's a good goal post that we should all set for ourselves and try to reach at some point, because it's very important to live by your personal values and also have those values reflected in what you do for 8 to 10 hours every day. Like हाँ पैसे बनाना is important, growth is important, but at the end of the day, you should also feel good about the work that you're doing. So yeah.
And sometimes you have to do a lot of things to figure out like what makes you feel good, right? So I think this is a solid thought to really end our conversation with. And thank you, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Haya. Thank you. Take care. Allah Hafiz.